It, it looks like we have a good crew here. So there's about 60 people on the call right now, and I'll keep letting them in. I'm Shannon and just here to help support with the tech, but excited to hand the mic over quickly to Jacqueline Greene.
All right. Thanks everyone for being here with me tonight. I hope that this training is useful for you. Like Shannon said, my name is Jacqueline Greene. I am a partner with the law firm of Friedman and Gilbert, which is a civil rights and criminal defense office. We have offices here in Cincinnati and also in Cleveland. I'm also the co-coordinator for the Ohio chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. And I will explain a bit about the Guild, but before I launch into that, I want to just remind everyone here that this presentation is recorded. So any questions, any comments, all those kinds of things, just so everybody knows, are going to be recorded. Also, just so everybody knows, any questions you have for me as we move along, I'm going to be covering a lot of ground and probably a lot fairly quickly. I'll try to explain it as well as I can. But due to limited, I think, time, I'm hoping to cover a lot of ground quickly. So if you have questions, if you could put them in the chat, that would be great. And Shannon will help coordinate getting those to me when the time is right. So I'm gonna launch now if everybody's all right with that. I am, like I said, co-coordinator for the Ohio chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. The National Lawyers Guild is an organization that was actually founded in 1937 as the first racially integrated bar association in the United States. And our members include lawyers, law students, jailhouse lawyers, meaning folks on the inside doing legal work, and also community members, folks who we would call legal workers, people who are working on anything related to the legal system in terms of supporting movement work. We are the oldest and most extensive network of public interest and human rights activists working within the legal system as actors as part of that system. And you know, the complicated politics and analysis around that is a conversation we can have another time. In any case, we attempt to use the system in order to affect basic change in the structure of our political and economic systems. And that's what we're fundamentally dedicated to. Human rights should be held more highly than property rights. And I think that that's really a theme that's playing out in a bad way in terms of police response right now. So in any case, the Legal Observer Program was, for our purposes in our organization, established back in 1968 during the Democratic National Convention, when there were large protests and large police responses, state repression. And we provide legal observers across the country and chapters throughout the US. We are on the ground. We have little green hats. If you see anyone out in an action wearing a hat like this, they are with the National Lawyers Guild, and they are there to serve as legal observers. And as we move through this presentation, I'm going to talk to you, I'm give you kind of a modified version of what I would normally do training for our folks within the Guild. I've tried to make it available, accessible for folks who are organizers who want to do observing work within their own organization. And there are going to be different ways that you can organize that if you want, or it can be really informal. And I'm just giving you some tips on how you want to document while you're out in the streets. In any case, though, just so everybody knows, if you do want legal support from the Guild for some action that you have planned, and you want our legal observers there, you can make that request, and we will do our best to send people out. Obviously, there's a lot of action going on right now, and we can't be everywhere at once, but we're trying. And if you're interested in having our legal observers present, I have this link on the screen. You can see the tinyurl.com/Cincy legal support. That's where you can make a request for us. At that link, never provide any sensitive or confidential information, but you can make the request. As I move through this presentation, I just want to caveat the whole thing by saying that everything that we have to talk about today are guidelines. They are ideas about how to document. There are things to look for. But all of this comes with the huge caveat that everyone's #1 priority has to be the safety of themselves, the safety of their people, the safety of the people they're organizing with. and getting home at the end of the night is always the most important goal. And obviously I sit here as a white woman, I can move through a lot of spaces pretty easily and very safely, and that's not true for a lot of people. And so, you know, at every stage when you're doing this work, always, I'm not trying to tell people to do things that are unsafe for them. And I just want to be clear about that from the outset. So let's see here, I want to move to my next slide. The role of the legal observer. What do we do? Why are we out there? We are there to monitor and document law enforcement behavior. And I actually don't even like that word. Police behavior is really the term that I would use. We are there only to document the cops. We are not there to document the conduct or acts or words or whatever it may be of people engaged in demonstration or actions. We are a witness to police misconduct. That includes you know, lots of different things in terms of documenting stuff on the ground while we're out in the streets. That may include after the fact doing things like testifying at trial, providing affidavits, which are sworn testimony in a written form. We might be deposed in a civil rights lawsuit, which means testifying, usually in a conference room, but with a court reporter under oath in the whole 9 yards. We might be interviewed by attorneys representing protesters or engaging in mass defense efforts on behalf of people who've been arrested while protesting. So there's the on the ground component, and then depending on what happens in the aftermath, there are other roles that come up down the line. Generally, the idea is that having observers present serves as a deterrent to unconstitutional behavior by the cops. If they know people are watching, if they know people are taking videos and taking pictures and recording audio, just like, you know, maybe their own body cams sometimes have this effect, we hope, right? Though I don't know, that maybe remains to be seen. The hope is that our presence can deter some of that unconstitutional conduct. Legal observers through our program have been pretty instrumental in a lot of really, I think, serious instances of state repression in relation to protesters and demonstrations. In Ohio, for example, we had big protests in 2015 where a mass arrest occurred, actually not so dissimilar from the one that happened here on Sunday night, where people were herded into an alley en masse and arrested, around 100 folks. And the videos that our observers had were critical to getting all of those criminal cases dismissed, right? Because when we can combat the police narrative, when we can show that they're lying, you know, because we have documented what actually really happened, it's very powerful stuff. We were also present here in Cleveland during the RNC in 2016. And again, a number of people were arrested for a flag burning action. We got all those cases, including felony charges, dismissed, in part because of what the legal observers who were present were able to talk about. Legal observers have been instrumental in Ferguson, obviously during the uprising there. And I won't go on, the list is long, but our role for the Guild, we've been around doing this work, but also organizers can do this work in their own groups of folks. When you're doing actions, when you're doing whatever it is you're doing, you can do this work. And I think that it can be formal, like I said, or very informal. And it's going to be up to you to figure out what works for your organization. Now, for us, we think when we're doing our role, we tend to try to be considered sort of a third party to the protests, right? Obviously, the legal work that we do is in support of the movement, but the goal is to have people who can come and testify in court later and be, in theory, objective in the eyes of a jury, right? So we are visible, we wear these green hats, and we try to make it clear that we are not part of the protest, so that what we say is not written off by a jury as, oh, you know, you're just another one of those folks out protesting in the streets. Now, that's obviously a political tactic and a legal tactic that we're using. But I think that also when you are in your own group, you can do this observer work, and you don't necessarily have to take that approach. And I think that you need to just think about what works again for your organization. You can just be in the action, but know how and what to document when or if things should be are happening that should be documented. For us, for the Guild, if you see us out in the streets at the actions going on now, know that we don't serve as police liaisons or peace marshals. We do not talk to the cops. We do not advise folks on what their actions should look like or what they should be doing. We don't give tactical or legal advice. We're not participating. We also do not speak to the media on behalf of demonstrators. And the key to all of this, including for anything you're doing when you're observing in your own organization, is that we do not document demonstrator behavior. The police are already doing that. The cops got that job on lock. We don't need to do that for them. We are there only to identify police misconduct. So there are a few things you need to think about when you're considering how you want to engage in legal observer work or observer work for your organization. There are confidentiality concerns, there are legal concerns. Everything that you take down, and we're going to talk about how to take stuff down, whether it's written notes, it's videos, it's pictures, it's audio, all of that stuff, right, could potentially be subject to a subpoena from cops or the prosecutors, warrants. Or, you know, if you're sharing information with third parties, and depending on how you want to maintain this information, that could open it up to being discovered by, for example, the defendants in a civil rights lawsuit. You know, when you sue the cops and now they're the defendants. If you've shared whatever you gathered with a third party, there's no claim that it could be protected under the work product doctrine at that point. And obviously, if you're holding on to information, that could be subpoenaed, or there could be a warrant issued that could result in that information being uncovered. So you have to decide, you know, do you want to work with a lawyer? Do you want to be a part of a legal team effectively to have this information gathered? And at that point, you know, you can invoke potentially attorney-client privilege under the supervision of that lawyer whose agent you are out in the streets acting as, and on behalf of the clients that lawyer represents, which may be the organization, right, that is the client, or the people in the organization who are the client. Now, if you aren't doing this formally with a lawyer, in theory also, a lot of this stuff would be protected under what's called the work product doctrine, which is anything that's prepared in anticipation of litigation. So it means you don't have to turn it over to the other side in a lawsuit if it's prepared in this way in anticipation that there's going to be a lawsuit, right? Now, that kind of protection is not as strong as attorney-client protection. And, you know, anyone in theory who creates stuff for the purpose or in anticipation of litigation, anyone can assert that, that doctrine to protect whatever content you have, but it's not absolute. And if you're served with a subpoena or there's a warrant, you know, it's possible that those things could still be uncovered. So these are just things for you to think about. If you have lawyers that you work with, you can talk with them about this stuff and what might be the best course of conduct for you. Now, one other thing, I guess, in terms of legal concerns, like I have on the screen, LOs, I'm going to call them LOs. It'll be shorter for the rest of the presentation. They're not arrest proof. Just because we're wearing these green hats, you know, doesn't mean we're not going to get arrested right along with the protesters. In fact, I myself have been arrested while wearing a green hat with protesters, right? It doesn't make us arrest proof. All the orders, all the laws apply, even when you're documenting the cops in a kind of third party-ish role. And of course, the cops are going to do whatever the cops are going to do, whether it's legal or constitutional or not. We all know, you know, recording law enforcement is perfectly legal, but of course, when the cop tells you put your phone away or I'm going to arrest you, you know that if you don't put your phone away, they're probably going to arrest you. Now, whether or not they're going to get away with that is a different question that will be resolved later on down the line. But, you know, they're going to do what they want to do at any point in time. Again, I'm going to reiterate that you should not ever document anything that demonstrators are doing that would be perceived as illegal. That is not your job as an observer. You are there to document the cops and the cops alone. And again, the cops are doing plenty to document what what protesters may be doing. Now, on the day of an action, you have to prepare prior to, and then you have work to do on the day of. And again, this is going to look different for your folks depending on how you decide to set it up. Whatever you're going to do, you got to make a plan for roles and responsibilities. You know, how many people are going to be observers? Who's going to be buddied up with who? Are you meeting somewhere before? Is there a meeting point afterward? What time are you meeting? All those kinds of things. On the day of the action, you know, you check in with your coordinator. You can choose to have someone who's like on site, meaning like at the action, or you can have somebody who's back at home safely, which is what I think is probably the best course of action in most cases, because there's somebody back there who knows who's out in the streets, who knows that if folks get arrested, they know who they are, they can help try to coordinate any contact with legal teams afterward to engage in mass defense work, or if anyone needs to be notified about some kind of emergency, or if people are arrested and they don't have their necessary medications with them, you know, whatever. Somebody off-site is regularly in touch with the observers while they're out on the streets, and can help coordinate those kind of things. So how are we going to check in, and then decide what your tasks are and spread out. So one little caveat to that is that I think it's often a good idea to use encrypted communications when you are communicating with whoever your coordinator is or among members of your observer team. If you're doing that throughout the action, you don't have to necessarily have this kind of a network approach, but if you're doing that, encrypted communications are going to be a safer way for you to communicate. And I am not a tech expert. Call up the Electronic Frontier Foundation for another presentation if you want to know all about you know, security issues. I think that's a thing people need to really seriously think about in this time that we're in. So, you know, educate yourself on that kind of approach to tech. When you're out in the streets, it's just like going to an action, you know, dress comfortably, wear your comfortable shoes, wear your weather appropriate clothing. If you're doing something where you're identifying yourself as an observer, you can wear that gear. Obviously, we have our green hats. If you have your coordinator, make sure you got, you know, whatever communication system set up. The key to most observation work is your notepad and pens, or however you're writing down the notes that you are taking while you're observing. Make sure you have a watch or your fully charged phone that has a clock on it. Again, when you're using your phone, you got to think about tech security issues, full disk encryption, what kind of passcode you have. As an aside, facial recognition and fingerprint locks on your phone are more susceptible to essentially being searched than like a number passcode. So think about that before you go. You can also stick with the old-fashioned stuff, and sometimes this is the best stuff, using a camera. Bring a camera and extra batteries, and the notepad and pens. You don't have to bring your phone with you. If you want to remember anything you bring with you, as y'all know, if you're out in the streets, if you get arrested, that stuff is going to be taken from you when you're going into the jail or while you're in custody. And even if it's not taken as evidence, you don't necessarily know what's happening to it while you're sitting in custody. So just bear that in mind when you're out. Bring your water, bring your necessary medications. Again, in the case of potential arrest, avoid wearing contacts. Typically, if you're doing observer work, it's really good to stay in a pair of buddies. And that's for documentation purposes and safety purposes, both. For big demonstrations, you want to put people in the front, you want people in the back, you want people, you know, placed along the sides. And you also want some floaters. You can kind of move about and go to wherever stuff that is happening that needs people there. They can hop on that situation and document it. For smaller demonstrations, you know, obviously you don't need as many people and just kind of want front, back, and sides. On the buddy system, I do want to note, if you are a person who's become experienced as an observer, it's really great to be able to pair people who are new with people who've been doing it for a while. And also, if you have the use of a video or a camera or just any kind of like recording device that you're using where you're looking through a lens, it's really important to have the other person looking around with their eyes and not using their camera at the same time. And that's because when you're looking through the lens or looking through your camera, you know, you're not seeing everything that's happening. You may be missing something important that you should be documenting, but also maybe you are missing some kind of threat to your safety that is looming, and you're not seeing it because you're looking through the camera. So for both of those reasons, I think buddy system is an advisable approach. You know, typically we like to document when we first get to an action, you know, what cops are present. You know, is it city, is it county, is it state, is it feds? Who is it? Private security sometimes show up. Try to pay attention to who is around. If you see badge numbers, especially of the higher ranks, usually the higher ranked people are wearing white shirts. Try to figure out who seems to be in charge. Sometimes it's really important to know, you know, is a sergeant calling all the shots, or is it somebody much higher than that? That kind of information can be really important for both mass defense in the criminal legal system and for civil rights lawsuits if necessary down the line. Again, if you see vehicles, you know, just take note of what you see. If you see the kinds of vehicles that are used for mass arrests, you know, it's obviously something to be aware of, that maybe this is a plan mass arrest situation that the cops are going to implement, or maybe there are other types of vehicles that have different types of implications or ability to harm people. You just want to keep an eye on that. And when things start off too, you know, have the cops shown up? Are they showing up with flexi cuffs on them already? Like they're planning to arrest a ton of people? Do they have their riot gear? You know, what do they have? The big thing that will be important when you're documenting anything is location, time. All of that stuff is critical. So when you start, if there's a march, you know, as you're moving along throughout the day, you want to continually document at this time we were at this location, this intersection, right? And that becomes very important because a lot of times when people are arrested, the cops do a very, they don't document that kind of stuff well. And that can be very important for us when we're engaging in mass defense on the lawyer side of things, right? To try to find ways to get cases dismissed. So documenting location and time are very important. Also, it's just, you know, keep an eye, obviously, counter protesters, counter demonstrators, if they're there, you know, they of course can sometimes be part and parcel of the police violence that happens. For cops too, at any point, you know, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a bit, but, you know, when you see cops engaging in any kind of what you think is a rights violation, violent conduct, brutality, arrests that obviously shouldn't be happening, any of this stuff, you know, try to figure out who that person is. If you can see their badge number, write it down. If you can't do that, just document to the best of your ability what that person looks like. And, you know, even if you don't have a camera on you, you can still write down that kind of information. Again, like I said, location and time of any significant changes or actions or events are critical for everything that you're documenting. That's probably the most important. Just as a little kind of side piece of information, like I said, try to figure out who's in charge. This insignia that I have on the screen, you know, when you see someone with a star, with a little eagle dude, you know, the double bars, those things are useful. We know that people who are much higher up at the command structure are present and are overseeing whatever kind of brutality or false arrest or whatever it may be are happening. It's useful to know if there's someone like that there, or if there's someone not like that there, and if there are maybe patrol street officers who are kind of acting on their own. Okay, now as you are out there, I think, and I'll skip off this page for a second. I suppose I should just, before I move to that slide, I should just mention one of the things I'm covering here is police weapons. I think that a lot of us probably know what they look like, but it's very important when there are uses of force to document what kind of force is being used. And so I show them to you to just try to help you recognize what you're seeing when it's being used, okay? And so anyone who doesn't want to see this stuff, you can obviously look away at this point. So I'm going to move on to that now. On the top left, you have the taser. That's yellow and black. A lot of times they have neon colors on them, and they're usually going to be holstered on the opposite hip of wherever the cop keeps their gun. You know, we have batons. There are different kinds, but, you know, the baton is basically the stick that they hit people with. And then, of course, we all know what guns look like. I have on this next slide, I have horses. I have riot gear. Riot gear, you know, important to document. Sometimes this kind of stuff is used as a display of force, and even a display of force can be very important, even if no one's laying hands on someone. So documenting when riot gear is being worn is important, and which cops are wearing the riot gear, which ones aren't. A lot of times you'll see both in the same setting. But then I have horses here because I want to talk about horses and bikes very briefly. Mounted police horses are very well trained in using the mass of their bodies to push protesters around, sometimes even to trample over them. You know, essentially horses for cops are a form of crowd control, and sometimes for physical abuse. Bikes, likewise, are often, the ones that the cops ride are designed to be used to push protesters. They are designed to be used to form impromptu barricades. So, you know, useful for us to know if those are around and how they're being used. I have here just a couple of, you know, the kind of protest type weapons that we often see: chemical weapons, tear gas, canisters. We've seen that here in Cincinnati in the past week a lot, and also OC spray or pepper spray in the canister. We've also seen flashbangs here, which I don't have a picture of, but I think you guys know what those are, I'm sure. Document all of these things when they're being used, again, location, time, and you cannot always do it in the moment. To the best of your ability, do it in the moment, right? When your memory is fresh, exactly when you're seeing what's happening. If your safety is in jeopardy, of course, be safe and then document what you've seen. We also I have wooden pellets here, rubber bullets. I don't know that we've seen those here yet this week. I think that we've seen them in some other places in Ohio, though. So-called non-lethal weapons that we have seen, though, include pepper ball guns and maybe even beanbag guns. Those usually have orange or some kind of bright color on the stocks. So if you see those guns with a bright orange, it's some kind of so-called non-lethal weapon, though, of course, they can be lethal, right? I say that because that's what the cops call them, but they can be lethal depending on what happens. I have here also a long-range acoustic device. This is essentially a sound cannon designed for crowd control, but can cause very, very serious hearing injuries and really intense pain for people. If you see a vehicle with one of these things on the top of it, I mean, obviously it's not a satellite, right? It looks like you see this picture of this cop behind this LRAD on the right. If you see that, document it, but also be aware that if you are close to that thing, I mean, it can cause serious and permanent hearing damage. And if you start to feel that effect of the LRAD, you need to get away as quickly as possible. I do not know as I sit here whether Cincinnati has one of these, but there's been a lot of militarized weaponry that's been provided to local police departments across the country. And in the last several years, I think that we've seen these in a lot of places. So, be aware if you see this kind of thing, document it. Where was it parked? What direction was the sound device facing? All those kinds of things, even if it's not being used, because maybe it's worthwhile to note that in fact they're bringing this thing out, and if they're bringing it out at some point, they're planning on using it. Stingray, this is a weapon in the sense that it intercepts cell signals. Essentially, Stingrays act as cell site simulators, and they are surveillance devices. They mimic cell phone towers and send out signals to trick phones to connecting to them instead of to the actual cell towers. And then they can start to gather information about the phones of whoever happens to be in the vicinity when they're turned on. So I call it a weapon because obviously it's used as a tool of state repression. It doesn't necessarily cause any physical pain in the immediate moment, but whatever is intercepted can obviously be problematic, and it captures the information of anyone who's in the vicinity. So if you happen to see a van, that looks suspicious to you with this kind of stuff on top, and also sometimes what happens when they turn them on is suddenly your cell phone battery will drain. If you happen to see that, a Stingray may be in use. Now, if you see cops out and about with their body cameras on, it's important to note this because if the footage exists, we may want to try to get it later, right? For the purposes of defending our folks. Obviously, we're documenting, but the body cams are also documenting, and a lot of times they capture the things the cops are saying if they haven't turned them off, as a lot of them do before they start to talk about whatever it is they've just done or are about to do. And they're not running continuously either. They usually have to be turned on to start activating or start recording. Another source of potential evidence, though, to note in a situation where you've witnessed something that you think should have been documented and maybe you weren't able to, right, is police cruiser dash cams. If you see cruisers nearby, especially if their lights are on, a lot of times in cruisers, the lights are on, then that automatically will activate the dash cam. And if that camera is pointing in the direction of whatever happened, obviously getting hands on that documentation can be really important. One little side note that I will make is if you see police talking on cell phones rather than on the radio, this can be an important piece of information. Obviously, the radio traffic that cops generate is a matter of public record. If they switch to using their cell phones, it can be harder to get, but it can be important in the defense of a case, or if you're prosecuting a civil rights lawsuit, to know that that happened, because maybe there are records there that we need to get or things we need to ask about. So when you're seeing an arrest, date, time, location, again, critical pieces of information. The method and the manner of arrest. So if you're seeing uses of force or weapons brandished, used during the course of an arrest, document that. If you see 5 cops pile on top of a person, document that. You know, whatever the method and manner of arrest is, write it down. The arresting law, like police agency and the individual cops, if you know which agency it is, that can be really useful, in part because it helps us figure out, right, where are they taking our people. Different agencies might take people to different holding facilities. And also figuring out a badge number can be really useful if, you know, unlike this week, they seem to all have their badge numbers covered by rubber bands or something, but, you know, maybe you can catch a badge number. In the event of a mass arrest, a lot of times, and even not, you know, even in smaller or individual arrests, sometimes there are warnings given prior to the arrest, documenting the number of the warnings, the method. Are they just verbal? Are they quiet? Are they loud? Is there a bullhorn used? Is there a recording blasting out of a police vehicle? What is it? And what exactly did they say, right? The exact wording of the warning can be very important. Are there alternatives to arrest available to folks? Do they have a chance to leave or move to a new location or get on the sidewalk or whatever it is before the arrest start? And if they don't give those kinds of warnings, that's also really important to document. When a person is being arrested, if you can do this, and this is always, I think, an area ripe for potential problem, but if this is your person in your organization, hopefully you know who they are, you know their name. Date of birth can be important too. And you can sometimes, if it is safe, if you don't know the person, try to get that information during the arrest or from the cops after the arrest. Likewise, where they are taken, you can sometimes get that from the cops after the arrest. But again, only if it's safe. And this is the particular scenario in which I was arrested. There was someone being arrested, and I was just trying to find out who they were, and they snatched me up too. So you got to be mindful if you don't know that information already about safety concerns while you're doing it. During the course, for example, of a march or just generally in a demonstration, other things that are important to document are what we call pop-up lines, which is where the cops will suddenly show up either, you know, and they do this sometimes on foot, sometimes they do it with bikes, or they might do it with horses, or maybe they're even doing it with motorcycles. I think recently here in Cincinnati, or even cars, you know, they will pop up essentially and misdirect or separate demonstrators, split the group up, or and they'll detain people maybe on one side and other people can get away, or maybe they just split people in order to break the demonstration up, whatever it is. Pop-up lines are important to document. Kettling is important to document. Kettling is often a sign that a mass arrest is about to come, and I think that this seems like maybe what happened on Sunday, where people were essentially herded into an alleyway and then closed in on both sides. I think that this has happened a few times in the past week. I've heard reports about it happening on Vine Street too, where they close in on both ends of the street and there's just nowhere to go. That's called kettling. Denial of access to public forums. So if they're not letting people protest in parks or on sidewalks, public spaces like that, that's important to document as well. And then displays of force, you know, if they're doing things in order to chill speech, to deter people from protesting, I think it seems like they've mostly just advanced to using actual force at this point for the most part in the past week. Displays of force too should be documented. You know, in these kind of movement related things to document, again, which law enforcement cops were involved, whether the behavior altered the flow of the movement or the demonstration, did it trap people, did it otherwise impact the demonstration, or are there any identifiable groups that are being targeted, right? Is it specific individuals? Is it specific organizers? You know, whatever it may be, pay attention to that. If the cops offer any reason for their behavior, that can also be useful down the line, especially, for example, denial of access to public forums. If they say, you know, whatever reasons they give for that, they're probably not legal. Good to write down exactly what they say if you happen to hear them saying it. Sometimes it is safe to ask them why they're not letting people do this kind of stuff. Again, only if it's safe, and whatever the answer that you're given is, it could be very useful. So recording, of course, is legal. Pen and paper should be your primary source because it allows you to really observe what's going on around you. And to really get a whole picture of what's happening. We talked about smartphones earlier. Your password number code is safest. Turn off your cloud backup, encrypt, you know, if your phone's not full disk encrypted, good thing to think about. Again, for tech security stuff, I recommend going to the EFF. Date and timestamp everything. When you are recording, wide angle shots are often more useful than close-ups. And this is because you can get the broader context of what's happening. You can see where the event is located. And, you know, sometimes it's good to start with a wide angle and then get a little bit closer or zoom in so you can document exactly what's, you know, what use of force or what arrest is occurring at that moment that you're trying to capture. Short videos are better than long ones. Again, this kind of goes back to the whole don't capture what protesters or demonstrators are doing principle. The longer your video is, the more likely you may inadvertently capture something you didn't want to. So focus on the police misconduct, and shorter can be better than one rolling long video. Also for the purposes of if you're trying to use this stuff later for mass defense and criminal legal proceeding or in a civil rights lawsuit, these shorter videos are better for those purposes for a lot of reasons. Again, I'm not going to go to all that. I think I said it, a lot of it, but at any rate, if for some reason, if you can't get a good video, recording audio during arrests can also be useful if you can't get a good view. So all of this, I guess, again, comes back to this principle of don't engage anything that demonstrators or don't record anything demonstrators are doing. Don't record demonstrators who don't want to be recorded. And if you intend for this information to be useful as evidence in defense of a criminal case or in the prosecution of a civil rights lawsuit, do not put this stuff on social media. Do not share it outside your legal team. Do not share it with other people because you are trying to assert this work product status, right? And if you're working with an attorney, then this attorney-client privilege. As soon as you start sharing it with other people, those protections disappear, right? And you know, then they are much more easily subject to a subpoena, for example, which is a demand essentially to produce whatever documents or things that the cops or the prosecutors are requesting. You know, you just want to make sure that you protect this information to the best extent that you can. And if you're taking it with in anticipation of litigation, that is the reason why and by litigation, I mean, you know, going to court, whether it's a criminal case or a civil rights case, if you're generating this stuff in anticipation of litigation, you at least have the ability to assert that work product doctrine. Again, it's not absolute, that doctrine. It won't protect you all the time, but you know, it's an option and it's a tool that can be used. So I'm not going to do a full-on civil disobedience training here, but for this kind of stuff, if you're doing this within your organization, of course, you want to know ahead of time you know, who it is, their date of birth, collect that info as you would in any civil disobedience situation. When arrests are happening, the key then is to count the total number of arrests. Make sure that, you know, if 12 people were planning on participating, but 13 arrests occurred, you know, somebody else you have to figure out who that extra person is. Are they safe? Are they in the jail? You know, what's going on? Where are they at? Or, you know, if you thought 12 arrests were going to happen, and only 11 did, but you didn't pay attention to that. And then you're wondering, this last person, well, why aren't they coming up in the county's prisoner database? Why aren't they coming up on the court docket? What happened to this person? Well, actually they might just be safe, right? Because they didn't actually get arrested after all. Same thing here. If you could safely find out where people are being taken afterward and what charges they're facing, you know, that's information that is useful in the immediate moment if it is safe for you to get it. In mass arrests, there have been a number of those in the past week. They're confusing, they're scary. I think something to keep in mind, if you're acting as an observer for your organization, you're not going to be useful in that role or as useful in that role if you also get arrested, right? Because you're now going to be locked up too. You're not going to be able to go back to the legal team. You're not going to be able to call up the National Lawyers Guild for legal support until you get that phone call when you're in the jail or whatever, right? If you get arrested, now obviously I'm not telling people what to do here, make your own decision. I'm just saying this is a consideration that you should have when you're considering whether or not you need to get out of there or get maybe to a different location to observe. And I think that's an important thing to think about. A lot of stuff can be observed from a relatively safer spot. And, you know, you can avoid also then having your ability to advocate or rather connect with legal support for your folks if you're not arrested as well. If mass arrests are going to happen, in theory, cops should at least give one warning to tell protesters how they have to disperse or how long they have to disperse rather before they will be arrested. That does not always happen. In fact, here I don't think it's really happening, but it should be happening. And, you know, if there is a warning given, again, write down the time you hear the warning, what exactly is said, how audible is it, how is it given, bullhorn, regular voice, yelling, any other orders that are given at the time. If you don't hear that kind of a warning, also very important to write down that there was no warning before the mass arrest occurred. Mass arrest signs of this coming up imminently, flexi cuffs, you know, in large numbers, suddenly being brought on the scene, the pop-up lines and the kettling that we talked about earlier, also the appearance of empty buses, you know, empty transit buses suddenly appearing. This can be a sign that they're getting ready to pick up a lot of people. So that's all the documentation stuff that I have to talk to you about. I have a few kind of after the fact pieces to go through with you. And I know we have only a couple minutes left. So check back with your coordinator so they know you got out safely. If any arrest or unconstitutional activity occurred, write down, if you haven't written it down, everything that you witnessed immediately. Be as specific and detailed as possible. Again, documenting demonstrator misconduct or whatever is not something you're there to do. It's about the cops. Then you want to do with your notes, whatever your organization has decided. Are you personally holding on to them? Is the lawyer that you're working with holding on to them? Whatever it is you need to do with your notes, your video, your audio, you need to get it to them. I just want to wrap up at the end by saying, again, if you need legal observers, you want the guild out, we can do that. We have a link where you can request our legal observers to show up. Also here, and I'll just go through these individually. This is, and if anybody wants these little social media things, I can send them to you. Just let me, or I guess put it in the comments, and maybe I'll get them to the organizers and they can send them to you all. But at any rate, that's how you request us. The Guild also operates an arrest hotline. If you're out in the streets and you see a lot of arrests suddenly starting to happen, this is a place that you can report it, because it'll come back to me, and then I can talk to the Mass Defense Coalition that has formed here. We can figure out if there's some way we can respond or what we need to do to try to address what is happening, try to tell the cops, you know, if they're already making the arrests, hopefully they don't do that in the first place, right? But if they're already making the arrests, you know, we hope that we can get them to not do what they did on Sunday night to everybody by holding them outdoors in that courtyard. You know, if we know while it's happening, there are things we can do to try to advocate. So this hotline number is something you can call to report arrests as they're happening. And that, oops, sorry, let me go back. If you're arrested while you're protesting, the Mass Defense Coalition is a group of organizations that are working together to do mass defense for folks who are arrested during these protests that we have ongoing here in Cincinnati. The Public Defender's Office is working closely with the Guild, which is kind of unusual, but the Public Defender's Office here is very committed to mass defense and to supporting essentially the goals of the folks engaged in movement work. So this is the phone number. If you're arrested while you're locked up, this is the number you call. Or if you were locked up or you were arrested and you got a citation and you know you have to go back to court at some point, this is the phone number you call to find out what you need to know about that process, or to get qualified for representation by the public defender. If you don't qualify, meaning income levels qualifying you for representation by the public defender, the Guild is also working to organize private practice lawyers who can come in and represent people on a pro bono basis as well. To, you know, and obviously we can't guarantee representation, but we're doing our best to make sure that we can represent hopefully as many people as possible, and hopefully everybody, but again, I can't guarantee. You guys, I'm sure, know about the bail fund, up and running. This is the information for the bail fund. And again, this is my contact information. If for some reason you need to reach me directly, you can contact me there. Like I said, I'm coordinating a lot of the mass defense effort on the private practice side. And I also am a civil rights lawyer, and my practice is all about police misconduct and abuse in prisons and jails. That's what I do every day. So you can call about any of that in addition to protest work. So do we have any time for questions? I don't know.
We're right up against the end here. So I know that they're doing a closing session if anybody wants to jump over there, but maybe I'll ask you questions, Jacqueline, and then at least we'll have like some record when the video goes out in case people want to come back to it. A couple of folks asked about who could be a legal observer, like if you're in law school, or what if you're not a lawyer or law school, and if you're interested in a full training, like how do you become a legal observer?
For the guild, we don't have any requirements. Community members, I think, and organizers and folks who want to do this sort of legal side advocacy work, anybody can do it. And we at the guild are doing regular trainings. If you want to join the NLG observers in Cincinnati, we're doing full-fledged trainings regularly right now. In fact, there's one tomorrow night, I think at 8 o'clock, that's happening online. And then we're looping you into the local networks if you're interested in that. So email me, I guess is the answer to that.
It's the easy way. Great. And a question about not documenting anything that could be perceived as illegal. With the curfews being implemented, can you document anything after curfew?
You know, obviously, I think the city is enforcing curfew pretty aggressively. And so, you know, by documenting that people are out there, I don't know. You know, I mean, I guess my thought would be if you are out there also after curfew, you know, you're there to document whatever police misconduct may arise at that point. So I would focus on documenting what the police do after that to document brutality or arrests that shouldn't happen. The curfew part of it, you know, if you're out there, you're out there. You know, that I don't know that you need to write it down because you're out there. So
you'll be there. Maybe one last question. If we, there are some questions about saving to the cloud and what to do if you are trying to take video and you're advising them not to save it to a cloud, but then their phone gets taken. Is there any kind of protection that's safe to use as a backup?
You know, the safest kind of backup is always, again, and I'm not an expert in this stuff, so I highly recommend educating yourself, reading about it. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has a lot of great stuff to read about this, these kinds of security practices. But, you know, a hard drive is a great way to store things. You know, you can keep it at home and in a safe place that you want to keep it. The challenge with cloud stuff is that, you know, if your stuff is going into your Google Drive or your Google Photos or your iCloud or whatever, you know, if Apple gets served with a subpoena or a warrant rather, right? You know, you don't necessarily know that the warrant's been served and Apple might hand over all your stuff. So if there's a copy up there, it's susceptible to the cops getting it if they want it. And it's just a thing to think about. I mean, all of this, like I said, is guidelines. It's all stuff to think about. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm not here to give you legal advice. I'm here to just talk to you about things to think about while you're observing and stuff that will be useful for defending a criminal case or potentially fighting, you know, for a civil rights lawsuit. So make your own choices, educate yourself on that stuff. There are risks. I mean, there are always risks no matter how you store your stuff, right? If the cops take it, then, and also they could get a warrant for your phone and search your phone. And if it's stored just on your phone, then they could potentially get it too. So nothing is perfect and nothing is really safe. But there are some things that are safer than others, or at least have less opening to potentially not safe situations.
Great. Jacqueline, thank you so much for your time.